I've always been a night owl, which is probably why I didn't think twice when I was offered the night shift at the tech company I've been working for. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and honestly, I liked the quiet. The office building itself was an unremarkable structure downtown, with rows of cubicles and a break room that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee. My job was simple: answer customer queries through the company's online platform, troubleshoot technical issues remotely, and occasionally log details for the day team to follow up on. The hours dragged sometimes, but the solitude was a welcome change from the chaos of daytime shifts. It wasn't unusual for me to be the only one on the floor during my shift, with only a skeleton crew in the building. Security guards who made rounds and the occasional maintenance worker fixing something in the early hours. First, nothing seemed off. I'd show up to work, grab a cup of coffee from the break room, settle into my desk, and begin my shift. My cubicle was plain but comfortable. A swivel chair, a dual monitor setup, and a little desk plant I'd bought to add some life to the space. The first odd thing I noticed was the flickering light near the break room. It would buzz faintly and blink at random, which wasn't unusual in an old office building. Then there was the cold draft in the hallway leading to the bathrooms, even though the HVAC system supposedly kept the building at a consistent temperature. It was annoying but not alarming. I chalked it up to the quirks of working in an aging building at night. But over the next few weeks, the little quirks became harder to ignore. On one occasion, I left my desk to stretch my legs and found the chair in the cubicle across from mine turned slightly toward the walkway. I was certain it hadn't been like that before. Another time, I noticed a pile of files on a desk I passed by frequently had been shifted, even though I hadn't seen anyone on the floor. Once, I walked into the break room and found the fridge door slightly ajar, though I couldn't remember hearing anyone use it. These incidents weren't enough to truly spook me, but they did make me hyper-aware of how quiet the office was at night. The turning point came when I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. It popped into my inbox with a soft ding, standing out among the routine customer requests. The subject line read, "The rules." At first, I thought it was some sort of phishing attempt or spam, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the email, and what I saw made my stomach tighten. It was a list, plain and simple, with no explanation or signature. The email read, 1. If the elevator doors open and no one steps out, do not get in. If the elevator continues to stay open for more than 10 seconds, step back and avoid looking inside until the doors close. 2. If you hear typing coming from a cubicle you know is empty, do not investigate. Instead, return to your own desk and begin typing anything. You must keep typing until the sound stops. 3. If the emergency exit door opens on its own, do not approach it. If you hear footsteps approaching from the door, hide under your desk and remain silent until they pass. 4. If your computer screen glitches and you see something that looks like a distorted face, do not try to fix it. Power off the computer immediately and leave the building within 5 minutes. 5. If you see a pair of shoes under a bathroom stall but no one is inside, leave the restroom immediately. But if you hear movement from that stall before you leave, knock 3 times on the door and run. 6. If the office door locks itself and you cannot unlock it, stand in front of the nearest window and knock on it once. If you see movement outside, step back and wait for the door to unlock on its own. 7. If your phone vibrates and displays a message that says, "Don't look up," obey it. Looking up will reveal a pair of glowing, unblinking eyes staring directly at you from the corner of the ceiling, and the longer you look, the closer it will come. I read the rules over and over, trying to make sense of them. I replied to the email, asking who sent it and what it meant, but the message bounced back with an error. The sender's address didn't exist. I told myself it was nothing, that it didn't mean anything, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling the rules left behind. They were specific, too specific. That night, I stayed at my desk, unwilling to wander the floor like I usually did. The thought of the email gnawed at me, and I found myself glancing nervously toward the elevator and the emergency exit at the far end of the hall. Nothing unusual happened for the rest of the shift, but I couldn't relax. By the time I logged out and left the building, I was on edge. As the days passed, I tried to convince myself that I had overreacted, that the email was just a weird coincidence. But then, small things started to line up with the rules. The first incident happened with the elevator. I was walking past it to the break room when the doors slid open with a soft chime. The elevator was empty, but the doors didn't close right away. I hesitated, remembering the email, and stepped back. 10 seconds passed, then 15, but the doors stayed open. I could feel my heart pounding as I forced myself to look away. When I turned back, the doors were closing. I told myself it was just a glitch. Elevators malfunction all the time, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me from inside. Another time, I heard faint typing coming from a cubicle 3 rows down. I froze mid-step, straining to hear it. I was certain no one else was on the floor, but the sound was unmistakable, the soft, rapid clacking of keys. My first instinct was to investigate, but then I remembered the second rule. Instead, I hurried back to my desk, my pulse racing. I opened a blank document and started typing nonsense, my fingers trembling on the keyboard. The sound of typing from the other cubicle continued for a few agonizing moments before stopping abruptly. That's when I realized the email wasn't a prank. It was a warning, and whoever or whatever had sent it knew I was here. I sat at my desk, hands still resting on the keyboard, trying to calm my breathing after the typing stopped. My mind raced through every logical explanation. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe it was some weird electrical interference causing random typing sounds to play through the speakers. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't a glitch, and it wasn't my imagination. Something was wrong with this building, and it was watching me. The email wasn't a coincidence. It was sent for a reason. I was being warned because these rules weren't hypothetical. They were real, and I had to follow them if I wanted to make it through my shifts. The rest of the night dragged on. Every small sound, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant murmur of the HVAC system, even the faint creak of the building settling, put me on edge. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something that shouldn't be there. By the time my shift ended, I was practically running out of the office, relieved to step into the cold night air. But even at home, I couldn't shake the unease. I barely slept, and when I did, my dreams were filled with strange, distorted faces and unblinking eyes. The next few nights, I followed the rules to the letter. If the elevator doors opened, I kept my distance. When I heard typing, I immediately returned to my desk and started typing nonsense. I even avoided the bathroom unless I absolutely couldn't hold it anymore. And when I did go, I made sure to check every stall before stepping inside. The paranoia was eating away at me, but at least nothing terrible had happened until Thursday. That night, things escalated. It started with my computer screen. I was midway through a customer query when the screen glitched, flickering with jagged lines and static. For a split second, I thought I saw something. A face, distorted and stretched, its hollow eyes staring right at me. My blood ran cold as I froze, staring back at the screen. Then the email came flooding back to me, power off the computer immediately and leave the building within 5 minutes. My hands moved before my brain could catch up, slamming the power button. The screen went black, and the office plunged into silence. I grabbed my bag and headed for the exit, my pulse pounding in my ears. The hallways felt longer than usual, stretching endlessly in the dim light. As I approached the emergency exit, a chill ran down my spine. The door was slightly ajar, a faint breeze drifting in. My heart sank. Rule 3: do not approach it. If you hear footsteps approaching from the door, hide under your desk and remain silent until they pass. For a moment, I froze, unsure of what to do. Then I heard it. Faint, deliberate footsteps coming from beyond the door. I turned on my heel and sprinted back to my cubicle, diving under the desk just as the footsteps reached the hallway. My breathing was shallow, and I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep quiet. The footsteps grew louder, heavier, and closer. Whoever or whatever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They were walking slowly, as if searching for something or someone. I stayed completely still, my body trembling as the footsteps paused just outside my cubicle. My stomach twisted into knots as I waited, praying it would move on. Then, to my horror, I saw a pair of feet step into view. The shoes were old, scuffed leather, the kind you'd expect to see on someone from decades ago. The figure didn't move for what felt like an eternity, just standing there as I fought the urge to scream. Finally, the footsteps started again, fading down the hallway. I didn't move until I was certain the coast was clear. Crawling out from under the desk, I bolted for the main office door. I grabbed the handle and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. My chest tightened as panic set in. Then I remembered Rule 6. Stand in front of the nearest window and knock on it once. If you see movement outside, step back and wait for the door to unlock on its own. I hurried to the nearest window, my hands shaking as I rapped on the glass. The sound echoed faintly in the quiet office. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, in the reflection of the window, I saw movement, something shifting in the shadows outside. I couldn't make out what it was, but I knew better than to linger. I stepped back, keeping my eyes on the door. Moments later, I heard the faint click of the lock releasing. I didn't waste a second. I yanked the door open and ran into the hallway, my legs carrying me as fast as they could. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face, and I looked back at the building, half expecting to see something staring back at me from one of the windows. But there was nothing. The building stood silent and still, as if mocking me. The next day, I debated quitting. I wanted to walk away and never set foot in that cursed building again. But something held me back. Curiosity, maybe, or a sense of responsibility. I needed the money, and besides, I wanted answers. Who sent that email? Why were these things happening? And what would happen if I broke one of the rules? When I returned to work that night, I found another email waiting for me. The subject line was blank, but the message was clear. You're doing well. Keep following the rules. The email sent a chill through me. Someone or something was watching, aware of every move I made. The idea that I was doing well didn't reassure me. It terrified me. Why was I being tested? What was this all leading to? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, considering a reply, but I thought better of it. If whoever or whatever was behind this could send me such precise instructions, I didn't want to risk provoking them by breaking the implied rules of communication. I deleted the email and tried to focus on work, but my concentration was shot. I found myself glancing at the elevator doors every few minutes, half expecting them to slide open on their own. Just as I was starting to think I might get through the night without incident, something happened that made my blood run cold. I heard it for the second time, the faint sound of typing coming from the cubicle across the room. My stomach clenched as I remembered the rule. If you hear typing coming from a cubicle you know is empty, do not investigate. Instead, return to your own desk and begin typing anything. I forced myself to move, walking quickly but quietly back to my desk. Sitting down, I started typing nonsense, my fingers flying over the keyboard as if my life depended on it. The sound of the other typing continued, the clacking of keys echoing through the empty office. But then, something changed. The typing grew faster, more frantic, as if the unseen entity was trying to match my speed. My pulse quickened as I kept typing, refusing to look up. Suddenly, it stopped. The silence was almost worse than the noise. I hesitated, unsure if it was over, when I heard something new, breathing. It was faint but distinct, coming from the same direction as the typing. My hands froze on the keyboard, and I struggled to control my own breathing as the sound grew louder. It was labored, wet, as though whoever or whatever was struggling to draw air. Against my better judgment, I risked a glance toward the cubicle. Nothing. The chair was empty, the monitor dark. But the breathing hadn't stopped. It was closer now, as if it had moved into the aisle. My instincts screamed at me to keep my eyes on my screen, but curiosity, or sheer terror, got the better of me. I turned my head ever so slightly, just enough to see the corner of the aisle. A figure was standing there, shrouded in shadow. Its outline was wrong, jagged and uneven, as though it didn't belong in this world. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its stare, heavy and piercing, boring into me. My heart pounded as I forced myself to turn back to my desk, fingers trembling as I resumed typing. The breathing continued for a few agonizing moments before fading away, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. I didn't know how much more of this I could take. My body was tense, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. Yet I stayed. I didn't know why. Maybe I wanted answers, or maybe I was just too afraid of what might happen if I left. The rest of the night passed in a blur, my senses on high alert for any sign of danger. I kept expecting the emergency exit to swing open, or my computer to glitch, but nothing else happened. When my shift finally ended, I practically sprinted out of the building. The next night, I considered calling in sick, but I knew I couldn't avoid the office forever. Besides, the rules had kept me alive so far. As long as I followed them, I'd be safe, or so I thought. That night, the atmosphere in the office was different. It was colder than usual, and the lights seemed dimmer. I tried to ignore it, burying myself in work, but the unease was relentless. Around midway through my shift, my phone vibrated on the desk. I glanced at the screen and froze. The message read, "Don't look up." My blood turned to ice as I remembered Rule 7. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. My instincts screamed at me to obey, but the temptation was unbearable. What would I see if I looked up? Would it really be as bad as the rules claimed? The air grew heavy, and I felt a presence in the room, something watching me from above. My neck tensed as if an invisible force was urging me to look. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to focus on the phone. My thumb hovered over the screen, as though replying to the message would make it go away. Seconds dragged into eternity, the tension almost unbearable. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I closed my eyes, grabbed my bag, and stood up, keeping my gaze fixed on the floor. I didn't dare look up as I made my way to the door, my steps slow and deliberate. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step, and I could almost hear a faint, guttural sound, like something breathing or growling softly. My heart pounded as I reached the door and pushed it open, stepping into the hallway. The presence didn't follow, but the sensation of eyes on me lingered long after I'd left the building. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The shadows in my apartment seemed darker, more oppressive, and every little sound made me jump. I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows before collapsing onto the couch, too shaken to sleep. That was when I noticed the email notification on my phone. My stomach sank as I opened it. The subject line was blank again, but the message was chilling. You're getting too curious. Be careful. The days blurred into one another, each night shift heavier than the last. I kept to the rules, no exceptions, but something was changing. The office, which once felt like a hollow, eerie place, now felt like a maze, a place where I was being hunted. The unease was relentless, gnawing at me like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. And then came the night everything went wrong. Started like any other night. The hum of fluorescent lights, the rhythmic tapping of keys from my desk, the empty hallways stretching out before me in eerie silence. But then the air grew colder, unnaturally so, and the lights flickered in a way that made my skin crawl. I had followed the rules, stuck to them religiously, but now I wasn't sure I was safe anymore. The phone buzzed on my desk. I froze as I saw the notification. Don't look up. Rule 7. It had never felt more urgent than it did now. My body felt heavy with dread, but I couldn't ignore it. I sat perfectly still, eyes glued to my desk. For minutes, I did nothing but wait, barely daring to breathe. My palms were sweaty, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the screen, hoping for some sign that I wasn't alone in the room. And then I heard it, the faintest of sounds, like something dragging along the floor. It was coming closer. I held my breath, fingers clenched tight around the edge of the desk, but the sound stopped just short of me. I could feel its presence, like something was standing right behind me, watching, waiting. I didn't dare look up, not even a glance. But the silence that followed was worse than anything I had ever heard. Then came the tapping, a sharp, rhythmic tap, 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 coming from somewhere behind me. My pulse shot through the roof as I stared at the computer screen, focusing on nothing but the glowing letters. I didn't dare turn, not even a fraction of an inch. The sound of footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, echoing down the hallway. I couldn't breathe, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. I stayed frozen, desperately fighting the urge to look behind me. Suddenly, the phone buzzed again. I almost didn't want to look, but I had to. The message read, "Don't make a sound." I wasn't sure if I could hold my breath any longer. I needed to make sure I wasn't about to meet the thing that had been following me. I reached slowly for the keyboard, my fingers trembling as I typed out nonsense. Anything to keep me occupied, to distract me from the suffocating silence. Then, a faint noise reached my ears. The elevator. I'd heard it too many times to ignore it now. It was open, but no one had stepped out. A cold dread settled over me. I remembered the first rule. If the elevator doors open and no one steps out, do not get in. If the doors stay open for more than 10 seconds, step back and avoid looking inside until they close. I didn't need any more instructions. I didn't even have time to hesitate. I grabbed my things, heading toward the nearest exit. As I turned the corner, I saw it. The emergency exit door was wide open. The worst part, it hadn't been like that when I arrived. The darkness beyond the doorway seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the footsteps, faint but unmistakable, grew louder, closer. I had to follow the rules. I had no choice. I backed away, my hands trembling as I pressed my back against the wall. I crouched under the desk, trying to steady my breathing. My mind screamed for me to leave, but the rules kept me anchored in place, trapped by the very thing that had kept me alive. Then the footsteps stopped, and in the deafening silence, the tapping started again. I knew what I had to do. I didn't wait. I grabbed my things, heading to the elevator. But this time, I wasn't about to step in. As I approached, the doors slid open, and I saw it. Something standing just inside the elevator. A figure, dark and blurred, its face twisted in a grotesque mockery of a human's. The thing didn't move, but I could feel its eyes, dark, endless, and watching me. I backed away slowly, my breath shallow, but the rules still echoed in my mind. I couldn't break them now, not after everything that had happened. I glanced at my phone once more, seeing another message. "You broke the rules." My heart lurched. It wasn't just a message. The thing in the elevator, it moved. Slowly at first, then faster, closer. But I didn't run. Couldn't. The rules were there, keeping me safe, but they weren't enough to protect me from the reality of what was happening. I turned toward the exit again, but it was too late. The thing was already in front of me, towering over me. Its face was clear now, half covered in grotesque, stitched scars, eyes wide and gleaming with madness. And as it reached out, I could only think of one thing. The rules had failed, but I couldn't break them. Not now. And then, before it could touch me, I knocked on the window. The door unlocked, the latch clicking free. I didn't think. I didn't wait. I pushed through the door and ran out of the building, the thing's voice echoing in my head. The last thing I heard before I escaped into the night was the sound of typing. I got into my car, speeding down the road until I got pulled over by a cop. They asked me for my license and registration. Then they asked why I broke the rules. I was so frightened that I just drove away. I looked in my rearview mirror and they were gone. I got home and never went around that building again. But I still get strange things happening to me at home. Lights flickering, typing sounds and objects rearranged. I wonder if it's my imagination or if I'm being haunted because I broke the rules.